In the early 1940s, as Europe burned and Asia bled, the United States stood at a distance, powerful, watchful, and divided. Across the Atlantic, Hitler's forces had swept through France, bombed Britain, and threatened to consume the continent. In the Pacific, the Japanese Empire expanded rapidly, overtaking islands and nations in a wave of ruthless conquest. But in American towns, life still carried on in relative peace. Many believed it wasn't their war. That illusion shattered on the morning of December 7, 1941. At Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, Japanese bombers descended from the sky with merciless precision. In under 2 hours, more than 2,400 Americans were killed, battleships lay burning in the harbor, and the Pacific Fleet was crippled. The attack was sudden, devastating, and unforgettable. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress with words that would echo through history, a date which will live in infamy. In response, Congress declared war on Japan, and soon after, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. America was now fully in the war, not just as an arms supplier, but as a fighter. At that moment, the United States was a giant waking up strong but still stretching its limbs. Its army was not yet the world's most powerful. Its generals were seasoned in theory but not in global war. The soldiers were fresh-faced volunteers, farm boys, factory workers full of courage but lacking experience. Yet the will to fight burned hot. American factories switched from making cars and radios to tanks and bombers. Women joined the workforce in record numbers. The country transformed almost overnight into the world's largest war machine. But war is not fought in factories alone. America needed to prove itself on the battlefield. The first real test came not in Europe, but in the scorching deserts of North Africa. Instead of launching a direct assault on Nazi-occupied France, the Allies Britain and the US chose a more cautious approach. In November 1942, under Operation Torch, American troops landed in Morocco and Algeria. Their mission: drive east, link up with British forces, and push the Axis powers, especially German General Erwin Rommel, out of North Africa. For many American soldiers, this was their first step onto foreign soil, their first taste of combat. Some were met with unexpected resistance from Vichy French troops loyal to the Nazi-controlled regime. Others found confused civilians, uncertain whether to see the Americans as invaders or liberators. The landings were chaotic but largely successful. Soon, U.S. forces began moving toward Tunisia, where Rommel's experienced Afrika Korps waited. What followed was the brutal initiation of American ground forces. At the Battle of Kasserine Pass in early 1943, the U.S. Army faced a harsh reality. Rommel's seasoned troops launched a fierce counterattack, and the Americans, inexperienced and poorly coordinated, suffered heavy losses. Panic spread. Units retreated. Communications broke down. For a moment, it seemed the United States had underestimated its enemy. But this defeat would become a turning point. The U.S. command responded quickly. Leadership was reshuffled. General George S. Patton, aggressive, bold, and famously foul-mouthed, took charge. Troop discipline was restored. Equipment was upgraded. Tactics were refined. And with growing British support, the Allies regrouped. Over the next few months, American and British forces pressed forward, fighting through mountains and deserts, cutting off Rommel's supplies and forcing the Axis into retreat. By May 1943, the campaign ended in triumph. Over 250,000 German and Italian soldiers surrendered in North Africa. It was a stunning success. America had not just entered the war, it had arrived as a force to be reckoned with. The victory boosted morale, silenced doubters, and laid the groundwork for the next step, invading Europe through Italy. In July 1943, Allied troops landed in Sicily, opening a new front against Nazi Germany and its crumbling Italian ally. The fight in Italy was not easy. The terrain was rugged, the weather unforgiving, and the German defense fierce. Cities were bombed, towns turned to rubble, and mountain passes became killing fields. Yet the Americans and their allies pressed on. With each battle from Salerno to Monte Cassino, the soldiers grew tougher, the tactics sharper. Italy soon turned on Mussolini, and the fascist regime collapsed. Rome fell to the Allies in June 1944, marking the first Axis capital to be liberated. But while Italy's government surrendered, the Germans continued to resist bitterly in the north. The Italian campaign would drag on, bloody and slow, but it had served a larger purpose. It weakened the Axis, drained German resources, and gave American forces the combat experience they needed for what lay ahead. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, in the deserts of New Mexico and the labs of the Manhattan Project, American scientists worked in secret to build a bomb that could end the war in a single flash. But that moment was still to come. By the end of 1943, the United States had transformed from an isolated nation into the heartbeat of the Allied war machine. Its soldiers had fought across continents, its factories had flooded the front lines with weapons, and its leaders now sat at every major decision-making table. America had entered the fire and it was just getting started. The turning tide from Normandy to victory. By the spring of 1944, the world waited for what many believed would be the decisive moment of World War II. The Soviet Union had been pushing the Nazis back on the Eastern Front with unimaginable sacrifice. Britain had endured years of bombing. And America, fresh from victories in North Africa and Italy, was ready to open a new front in Western Europe, one that would force Germany to fight on two major fronts. The plan was bold, dangerous, and complex. It was called Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Normandy, France. Months of secret preparation had gone into it. Thousands of ships, planes, and soldiers stood poised along the southern coast of England. The night before the invasion, paratroopers were dropped behind enemy lines to disrupt communications. The early hours of June 6, 1944, forever known as D-Day, would decide the fate of Europe. At dawn, under a grey, cold sky, over 156,000 Allied troops stormed 5 beaches along a 50-mile stretch of the Normandy coast. American forces were assigned to Omaha and Utah beaches. The landing was hell. At Omaha, soldiers faced mines, machine gun fire, and crushing waves. Many drowned before even reaching the shore. Yet with unmatched courage and determination, they pushed forward, securing the beachhead inch by inch. Across the beaches, British, Canadian, and other Allied soldiers met fierce resistance, but broke through as well. The cost was staggering. Over 4,000 Allied soldiers lost their lives on that single day. But the beaches were taken, and the push inland began. The Normandy invasion was the start of a massive liberation campaign. For weeks, American and Allied forces fought through hedgerows, forests, and towns. Each village was a battlefield, each step forward was paid for in blood. Cities like Caen and Corentin changed hands multiple times. The Germans launched desperate counterattacks, but the Allies had momentum and resources. Behind the front lines, logistics was a massive challenge. Supplies, reinforcements, and equipment had to be ferried across the English Channel. The Allies built an artificial harbour at Arromanches, known as Mulberry Harbour, to unload tanks and trucks. Without this, the advance would have stalled. By August 1944, Paris was liberated. The joyous cheers of Parisians echoed through the streets as American tanks rolled in. It was a symbol of hope, a proof that tyranny could be pushed back. Yet the war was far from over. In the fall, as the Allies pushed into Belgium and Germany, the Germans launched their last major offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. In December 1944, the Nazis surprised the Allies with a massive attack through the dense Ardennes forest. The objective was to split the Allied lines and capture the vital port of Antwerp. American forces were caught off guard and suffered heavy casualties. But the American soldiers, many of them young, inexperienced, refused to break. In freezing cold, outnumbered, and surrounded, units held critical positions. The defense of the Belgian town of Bastogne became legendary. General Anthony McAuliffe's one-word reply, "Nuts," to a German demand for surrender, symbolized American grit. The battle lasted for weeks, but eventually, the Allies pushed back the Germans, who were now exhausted and outnumbered. The Battle of the Bulge was the largest and bloodiest fought by the United States in World War II, but it marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. As 1945 dawned, the Allies crossed into Germany. Cities were bombed relentlessly. Civilians fled or were caught in the fighting. American and Soviet troops raced toward Berlin from west and east. The war was a grinding, brutal march of destruction and liberation. In April, President Roosevelt died suddenly, and Harry S. Truman took his place. Truman would soon make a decision that changed history forever: the use of the atomic bomb on Japan. But on the European front, the end was near. By May 7, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. Victory in Europe VE Day was celebrated with jubilation. The sacrifices of millions had brought down one of history's most brutal regimes. But the cost was staggering: over 400,000 American deaths, millions wounded, and entire countries shattered. For the United States, this victory was the proof of their resolve and strength. The soldiers who had landed on the beaches of Normandy had marched through hell and back. They had fought through snow, mud, and fire to bring freedom to millions. Yet, the war was not over. Across the Pacific, the fight against Japan raged on with equal ferocity. From the Pacific Inferno to a new world order. While the guns fell silent in Europe, the war's fiercest battles still raged thousands of miles away in the Pacific. After Pearl Harbor, the United States had declared war on Japan, but victory would not come easy. The Pacific War was a brutal, island-hopping campaign against an enemy who fought to the last man, willing to sacrifice everything for their homeland. In early 1942, the Japanese Empire seemed unstoppable. They had taken the Philippines, Guam, Wake Island, and threatened Australia. The United States Navy suffered a devastating defeat at the Battle of the Coral Sea, but it was the Battle of Midway in June 1942 that changed the tide. Against all odds, American forces sunk 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, crippling their offensive power. Midway was a turning point. America was now on the offensive. The island-hopping strategy was brutal and costly. Instead of attacking every Japanese-held island, American commanders targeted strategic locations to slowly push Japan back toward its own shores. Every step was a fierce battle. At Guadalcanal, American Marines fought jungles, diseases, and entrenched Japanese soldiers. The battles for Iwo Jima and Okinawa in 1945 were among the bloodiest in the war, with thousands of American and Japanese lives lost. Iwo Jima was symbolic. The famous photograph of Marines raising the American flag atop Mount Suribachi became an icon of sacrifice and determination. Okinawa was even deadlier. The ferocity of Japanese defense foreshadowed the potential cost of invading Japan itself. Back home, the war effort reached a fever pitch. Factories produced planes, ships, and bombs at an unprecedented scale. Scientists working on the secret Manhattan Project raced to complete the atomic bomb, a weapon that could end the war with a single strike but also threatened unimaginable destruction. In August 1945, that weapon was unleashed. The United States dropped atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The devastation was staggering: over 100,000 people killed instantly, tens of thousands more from radiation later. Japan surrendered unconditionally shortly after, bringing World War II to an end. The cost of victory was unimaginable. Over 400,000 American lives were lost in the war, millions more wounded. Cities in Europe and Asia lay in ruins. But the war also marked the rise of the United States as a global superpower. Its economy was booming, its military unmatched. To prevent future chaos, the United States launched the Marshall Plan in 1947, pouring billions into rebuilding war-torn Europe. The plan helped revive shattered economies, stabilize governments, and contain the spread of communism. It was a new kind of war effort, one fought with dollars and diplomacy rather than guns. In the post-war years, America shaped the world order, leading the creation of the United Nations, forging alliances like NATO, and standing as a beacon of democracy in the Cold War era that followed. The sacrifices of World War II had transformed a nation and redrawn the global map forever.